Hello everyone, welcome to The Green Man for my second Albums of the Decade video. And in this one I'm tackling the 2000s and I will be listing my top 20 albums of this decade. This is, all the usual disclaimers, completely subjective lists. We all have different experiences of music as we are, going through life. I'm sure your list would be somewhat different, which is absolutely fine. I'm bound to miss lots of albums from the 2000s as well. There are bound to be many that I didn't sort of listen to. Now, the interesting thing for me about the 2000s was that for me it was a time when I was growing up. I was, from first half of this decade I was a teenager still, the second half, obviously a young adult. So going through a phase of lots of change in my life, at the same time being introduced to some really interesting, really amazing bands. And certainly this was the decade that got me into heavy metal without a doubt. And there are albums in here which maybe I don't listen to as much now, or maybe don't even love as much now, but they were so important to me at the time in leading me to other similar artists, similar bands, that they led a pathway down to a lot of other metal bands and rock bands. Undoubtedly, in the 90s I was aware of heavy metal, but much younger back then I was kind of just listening to whatever was on the radio, whatever members of my family, my parents were playing at that time. So without further ado, this list, as I say, very much subjective, and I'm going to start with my number 20 now, and this is actually Queens of the Stone Age, Songs for Death. So definitely an album that really, some huge radio hits on here. I mean, you had stuff like No One Knows, one of a really big hit single, which, to be honest, I've heard enough times in my life now, but the album as a whole is actually really good. There are a few tracks on here that may have escaped the attention after the years since this album has been released. I mean, The Sky Is Falling is one of my favourite tracks from this album and from Queens of the Stone Age, I think, period. Really also like Go With The Flow on here. And it's an album which does flow incidentally very well from beginning to end. Probably a favourite Queens of the Stone Age album for me as well. It's almost one of these kind of iconic albums, certainly of this decade of the 2000s. I saw them live at the V Festival in 2003. If I've got that wrong, that's embarrassing. I think it was 2003, and they were incredible. And one of my first live music experiences actually at that festival, and for me, they were the best bands actually that I saw. Really good live. And to be honest, again, one of these bands that were my early, heavier listenings. Sure, people might say they're more hard rock than metal, but you can debate that endlessly. But they're, for me, a really good band. And now number 19 is the Black Dahlia Murder with Nocturnal. One of Black Dahlia Murder's slightly more visceral, chunky kind of albums, where there's a bit more groove in this album, with tracks like Climactic Degradation, To a Breathless Oblivion. Obviously a huge song, What a Horrible Night to Have a Curse. I love that track, it's absolutely amazing. Black Dahlia Murder Nocturnal, probably my favourite Black Dahlia Murder as well, gotta say, certainly up there with their best for me, although they've not really released a bad album. One of these bands that haven't released a particularly bad album at all. Coming in at number 18 is Nightwish with Dark Passion Play, a band whose discography I'm very recently ranked. So if you watch that video, this might not be a surprise that this has come in pretty high also on my albums of the decade. I love Dark Passion Play. I think it has, as well as having lots of great hits, it has that first really epic opening track, The Poet and the Pensioner, one of the most beautiful songs I've heard from Nightwish, using all their strengths, the heavier elements, the more symphonic elements, the beautiful operatic singing at times in this track. And it really is such a great song. It makes me hold the whole album in high regard because of it, but there's lots of other good hits on this album as well, with Annette Olsen obviously on the vocals. Really love this Nightwish album, and it was my number one on my ranking video for Nightwish. Coming in next, I think we're down to number 17 now, which is the band of this t-shirt, Catatonia, and their album Viva Emptiness from 2003. This is where Catatonia actually became slightly more, maybe I want to say slightly more accessible, and a little bit more, there's the really doomy to begin with. I mean, maybe just becoming slightly less doomy and a little bit more melodic and kind of catchier with albums like Viva Emptiness. So I love it. I love Viva Emptiness so much. One of the first albums that got me into Catatonia properly. I think they're a really underrated band. Some might say, you know, I'm sure a lot of metal YouTubers I know really love Catatonia, and I'm no different. But I still wouldn't say they're a band that, you know, in the mainstream is really, you know, in fact, you think of the pop group Catatonia probably if you're only aware of that name in the mainstream as opposed to the metal bands. A prog metal band, but Catatonia are absolutely amazing with this album. There's so many good hits. Criminals, Remembrance, Burn the Remembrance, sorry, and that 3 songs in a row of Complicity, Evidence and Omerta is just a wonderful way to sort of bring you to the end of this album. I love that sort of 3 tracks in a row of Catatonia brilliance for me. Coming in next is more of a sort of indie alternative choice here on this list. Okay, it's British Sea Power with Open Season, and I came across British Sea Power entirely by accident. They were supporting the Maccabees, I think, and I just grew to love their music over time. Not one necessarily for just straight up indie music, but there's something about British Sea Power that have a slightly more post-punk melodic kind of vibe, which I really, really like. And British Sea Power just have that in droves, and I love the singing, I love their use of trumpets and stuff, and they're an amazing, I think really ambitious, really original band, and I can't think of many bands that you can say sound exactly like British Sea Power. They're pretty original to me. And Open Season, what an album this is. It ended on an oily stage, and O Larson B, I think, probably my 2 favourites on this album, but the album as a whole really good. I'll Be Gone as well is a track I love. So that's British Sea Power coming in number 16. Number 15, Opeth with Gross Reveries. Don't need to say too much here. I did this on my, I think this album was pretty high up in my ranking video. Personally, I actually prefer this to Blackwater Park as well. You know, Ghost of Perdition, The Baying of the Hounds, Harlequin Forest, Ghost River is really just an amazing album. Personally, I think you got lots of epics on here. I don't know for me what it is that puts it above Blackwater Park as such, except I do just slightly prefer it. I think the songs for me I go back to more. So yeah, I'm going to leave Ghost River is here in at number 15. Number 14 on my list is Cybreed with Antares, this industrial metal band. If you like your Fear Factory, be sure to check out Cybreed. They've got so much good stuff. And, you know, in the 2000s they released this album, I think it was 2007, Antares. And it's got really catchy, really kind of energetic, amazing industrial metal with these choruses that leave you with goosebumps. I think really they're just an amazing band that, again, in this case, not many people know of Cybreed, and I think that's a shame. I think they were great whilst they were around, and unfortunately now I think the band has split up. Was it too long ago? I can't remember now, but they've split up, I know that. Next on my list is number 13 now, and I'm going to prog metal again, and this time I'm going to Threshold with their album Critical Mass from 2002. One of my, if not my all-time favourite Threshold albums, I think, apart from maybe Legends of the Shires. Critical Mass is an amazing album. You've got some really epic tracks on here, but there's a 3-part track, which is the title track, Critical Mass Parts 1 to 3. Which is 13 minutes of just outstanding, you know, prog metal, guitar soloing, really atmospheric feel as well at times. The album, it's just a song which takes you on a really amazing journey. You won't notice the 13-minute length of this 3-part piece. I mean, it's just outstanding. It's absolutely outstanding from Threshold. And the whole album is good with tracks like Unto Them, I think it is, Do Unto Them even. I have got here Choices as well, as I've mentioned, just really good. The sixth studio album from Threshold, absolutely brilliant. 12 on my list is In Flames. God, working through this, trying to get through this quickly now. 12, In Flames, Clayman. Again, another bands that I've done a discography ranking for, so feel free to check that out. Clayman was pretty high up, I think it was at number 3 or 4. And, you know, I just really, really like this In Flames album. For me, this is them kind of around about the time of their peak, when they had, you know, recently released albums like Horacle, Colony, and In Flames at this time couldn't really do any wrong. They were just on an absolute roll. And for me, Clayman is a pretty, really, really strong album, and one that I keep going back to when you've got tracks like Bullet Ride that open the album up, Pinball Map, the title track. I really like Swim myself as well. Just so many good songs on this album. Had to be high up on this list for me. Comes in at number 12, In Flames, Clayman. Number 11 is Porcupine Tree with Dead Wing. Dead Wing is a sort of, for me, it's kind of one of their more memorable albums, actually. A lot of people would say they would go for In Absentia, I think, or Fear of a Blank Planet from this decade, but I'm going with Dead Wing. Really lots of cool stuff. One of their heaviest albums, I think, for sure. Kind of less on the rock or psychedelic side. This was more Porcupine Tree on the metal side with the opening track, Shallow. Personally, I love the really kind of atmospheric and beautiful and journeying, Arriving Somewhere But Not Here. That for me is an outstanding Porcupine Tree track. And yeah, I just really have come to love Dead Wing over time even more as the years have gone by. I think it's a great album. Stephen Wilson for me produced a banger there. Coming in number 10 now, we're in the top 10, so really, really my all-time favourites here from the 2000s. Number 10 is Kill Switch Engage, Alive or Just Breathing. An album which had a massive impact on me personally, and I couldn't leave it off this list as a result. And my memory of seeing Last Serenade on Kerrang when I was about 16, 17 years old has stayed with me for a long time, because I just remember getting absolute goosebumps from that track the first time I heard it. I hadn't heard anything really like it at that time in my life anyway. It was just really heavy, amazingly memorable. I liked the way the harsh vocals were mixed in with the melodic vocals, which was a sign of things to come for my taste in music. Alive or Just Breathing is a classic for me. People might throw it in with the whole new metal and metalcore. I mean, in fact, it was, you know, one of the forerunners, if you like, of the metalcore movement, all of that. But genre labels, you know, forget them. This album's a great one for me, and started Kill Switch on a pretty decent career as well. Later with Howard, of course, on the vocals, and not Jesse, and then Jesse coming back actually in the 2010s. So really good stuff from Kill Switch here. Just for me, what an album. And I've actually picked that ahead of End of Heartache, but End of Heartache was my number 1 in the ranking. But anyway, number 9. Number 9 is Soilwork's The Chain Heart Machine. What a Melodeath album from Soilwork this is. This is their second studio album that came out in 2000 and made my number 1 in my Soilwork list. And this is superb stuff. And I think, again, it's one of those albums that was bringing me towards a slightly more extreme metal or melodeath, certainly the melodic death sound. This got me into that somewhat, although I didn't come across this album at the time it was released. It was a bit later than 2000. Later in 2000 I, you know, encountered this, but I mean, just a terrific album, you know, a banger for sure, with tracks like Generation Speed, Kill On, Spirit of the Sun. Just amazing stuff. Number 8 is one of the all-time iconic albums, which makes so many lists. It's talked about so much even today. It is a new metal giant, it has to be said. You know, this is one of the albums that probably still gets a lot of talk and respect as well, I think, of that movement. And that is, of course, none other than Hybrid Theory by Linkin Park. And the reason why it's high up on my list is because I think it deserves to be. And personally for me, yeah, it's a kind of, you know, catchy, groovy album which takes, which has very real accessibility to it. And I know it's very popular, and a lot of people get turned off by things that get very popular. And I know Hybrid Theory does fall into that category. But this album's too important to me to leave it off this list. I cannot leave it off this list, because even though I don't revisit it quite as much these days, perhaps as I once, you know, did, for me, it's a great album and just too important. I can't leave this off. This is one of the first, you know, kind of really the heavier side of my musical listenings that I encountered when this came out, and it was just one of those gateway albums. I was going to say gatekeeper albums, gateway albums that led me on to so many other things. So I can't put Hybrid Theory really lower down than this. I think it has to come in at number 8 here. Number 7, Jira with From Mars to Sirius. Another album which really, I think, was kind of, these guys are pioneers. The work, very unique sound though. No one can really say Gojira sound like much else. They've established their own sound with their weird rhythms and the slides on the guitar. That has, you know, that sound has become something that people always refer to a Gojira slide in a lot of with a lot of artists' music these days, in the metal genre particularly. When you hear that scratchy sound, you think, yeah, Gojira slide. This was one of the albums that brought that to the fore. I think those techniques and that very distinctive Gojira sound was really established here with From Mars to Sirius. Great album. Number 6 is another fantastic progressive metal album from the 2000s, none other than Colours by Between the Buried and Me. And this was just such an ambitious, crazy, frenetic kind of an album where you just don't know where these guys are going to turn to next. And I love that kind of music, and this album really challenged me so much. I didn't actually discover Between the Buried and Me, or as they're often called, BT Bam, until the 2010s. So this is an album I'm looking back on now. But I mean, wow, I mean, just a spectacular album with these such talented musicians. My favourite song here would be Informal Gluttony. Love that track. Son of Nothing, I think, and obviously White Walls has to come in here as well. Now down to number 5, into the top 5 real serious stuff. Alice in Chains, Black Gives Way to Blue. Of course, an album I've referred to 2 or 3 times on this channel since I started it, so it's an album I often seem to talk about, and I think it's because I really want to just kind of get out there that in spite of this being post-Lane Staley era, I just think this album is a really fantastic album, and I've been back to it so many times since I heard it. It has to be on this list, and it has to be high up for me as well, and it just kind of has this kind of personal feeling to it, this emotion to it, which makes this album almost kind of, I can't sort of, I can't detach myself from it. And you got tracks like Private Hell, tracks like Your Decision, tracks like the title track, you know, the opener, All Secrets, and that is just an amazing album, has to be said, and I think it's so underrated. Didn't get a number 5. You know. Number 4 is another really big progressive metal album. You know, probably again one of these kind of iconic ones too. Lateralis by Tool. I mean, I don't really need to say. I think on YouTube, this album gets so much coverage. I probably don't really need to talk about it all that much. I mean, I love The Grudge. I think that's probably my favourite Tool track actually of all time. Ticks and Leeches would also be probably up there. The title track. It's such a really, out of all of Tool's albums, this one really does keep me engaged from the very beginning to the end. I think a couple of other Tool's albums, I sort of drift in and out a bit more, but with this album, I'm there for the entire listening experience of this magnificent Tool album, for sure. Up to number 3 now, so really these are now my serious favourites, and this is next one is Insomnia, Above the Weeping World. Just an amazing album from these guys, who really, in spite of the brutality of their sound, also managed to weave in beautiful verse sections with folk sounding melodies and you know, amazing songwriting. A couple of tracks on here that really just had such a massive impact on me. You know, you sort of, after you listen to an Insomnium song, sometimes you just get goosebumps, and you have to take 5 minutes out afterwards because it's had such an impact on you. And there's a few songs on here that do that. I think one in particular, The Last Statement, is one. Into the Groves of Death, probably another one. Drawn to Black, fantastic track as well. You know, really good one, that one. Slightly catchy, I think, that one too. Great album. Now, number 2. Number 2 is another band I talk about on this channel quite a bit, Meshuggah and Obscene. Could have chosen, oh God, you know, Catch 33, I suppose, and there was the Nothing album, wasn't there, as well. But I think Obscene is just too quintessential Meshuggah for me, with Dances to a Discordant System, Bleed, obviously Electric Red, the title track again. Too much amazing Meshuggah to be ignored, and too much amazing Meshuggah for me to put, you know, I put it very high. Number 2 is coming, and I just thought, you know, they're a band I've come to just love so much over the years. I thought number 2 was about right. And it's coming in number 2. So what's my number 1? And I think if you know this channel, or if you've been following it since maybe the beginning, this probably won't come as much as a surprise that I've named this album as my favourite, because I have spoken about it in the early days on the channel as well. And that is Mastodon's Blood Mountain. And I said in a recent ranking video of Mastodon albums, I prefer this to Crack the Sky. I just think this album is so challenging. It's so... there's a lot of different things going on to keep you engaged with the music. Capillary and Crest, and the opener is fantastic. Big fan of Crystal Skull. Love that live performance video, I think, in Japan. It's just amazing. So much good stuff from Mastodon in this album, and I feel like I've spoken about this album enough on the channel to really not have to say much more about it. But yeah, I do just prefer it that bit more to Crack the Sky. I just think it's so, like I say, challenging, ambitious. You don't quite know where they're going to go next, and that's the kind of album that in prog metal and stuff I just love to hear. And I would say it was one of these kind of gateway albums for me when I heard this album in the late 2000s. It just touched a nerve, and rather like I said with Linkin Park's Hybrid Theory, it opened the door for me to a bit more extreme sounding metal, and without which perhaps some of these albums I wouldn't listen to in the first place. So thank you very much for following this video. Do feel free to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed it. If you like kind of lists and album reviews, or even some of the other coverage I do about sci-fi, fantasy and horror, then feel free as ever to check those videos out as well. Otherwise, take care everybody, and enjoy what's left of your weekend. Take care.